order. Welcome to meeting number 28 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is webcast and is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 and the motion adopted by the committee, on Monday, March 12, 2021, the committee will commence its study of Canada's exports of environmental and clean technology goods and services. Before us as witnesses today, we have Electric Mobility Canada, Daniel Breton, President and Chief Executive Officer, Alain Martin-Poltrak, President, from Carbon Upcycling Technologies, Aper Signac, Chief Executive Officer, and Madison Savalo, Chief of Staff. And expecting to connect soon, I hope, is the Canadian Nuclear Association, John Gorman, President and Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Breton, you have the floor. Before you start, Mr. Breton, I believe Mr. Savard-Tremblay wanted to make a point of order.
Good morning. I don't only want to make a point of order, just a clarification on the fact that Mr. Breton is the spouse of the director of my riding office. There's no conflict of interest, but I want to be very transparent. It won't change my work here, and I just want to highlight the professionalism of this company. So just in the interest of transparency, I wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. We appreciate that transparency. All right, on to Mr. Breton, please.
Mr. Breton, à vous la parole. Good morning. We'd like to thank committee members of the Standing Committee on International Trade for its study on Canada's exports of environmental and clean technology goods and services. Founded in 2006, Mobilité Électrique Canada is one of the first companies in the world to focus on electric transportation. We have many members, including Canadian SMEs, mining multinationals, auto manufacturers, electricity and charging infrastructure providers, technological companies, research centers, towns, universities, fleet management operators, unions, environmental NGOs, and more. So our company has the most experience and expertise to help advance thinking, regulations, and projects with regard to electric transportation. Our members also work on parts of complete electric vehicles, be it cars, trucks, buses, skidoos, boats, or charging infrastructure, and they're based across the country.
21, published just a few days ago by the International Energy Agency. Electric car registration increased by 41% in 2020, despite the pandemic-related worldwide downturn in car sales, in which global car sales dropped 6%. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance EV Outlook 2020, by 2025, EV sales will hit 10% of global passenger vehicle sales, rising to 28% in 2030 and 58% in 2040. According to a newly released report by TD Economics, it is estimated that by 2050, between 312,000 and 450,000 of Canada's current 600,000 direct and indirect jobs in oil and gas could become casualties of falling demand for fossil fuel as more countries and companies commit to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. According to another report, the Fast Lane, tracking the energy revolution from Clean Energy Canada, there will be approximately 560,000 clean jobs by 2030 in Canada, almost 50% of them in clean transportation. According to a 2020 analysis by EMC, Canadian electric mobility strategy, inspired by those of BC, California, or Quebec, could generate up to $200 billion in revenue between 2021 and 2030. We at EMC are convinced that with all its expertise, plus its natural and human resources, Canada is in a perfect position to become a world leader in electric mobility in partnership with its US ally. But there's no time to waste, since other regions like Europe and Asia are accelerating their investment in the EV industrial revolution. EMC fully supports the Canadian and US government's agreement on the importance of the development of a zero-emission vehicle future and a battery strategy. That's why we recommend that Canada develop its own electric mobility strategy that includes a ZEV supply chain strategy, more charging infrastructure, ZEV rebates, education and training, and finally, ZEV regulation, since voluntary measures won't be enough for Canada to reach its climate and ZEV adoption targets. That Canadian and American EV-related companies get access to our own strategic minerals and metals. That Canada doesn't just end up exporting its natural resources where they will be transformed into finished products for electric vehicles, meaning that the added value will be outside the country. That Canadian EV products, technologies, and services get access to the US market. That with many members of EMC already exporting or about to export to the US, we address the issue of the Buy American Act to see how both countries can work together on a North American EV strategy inspired by the one in Europe. That we transition to green procurements as a way to help innovative companies in the EV industry in Canada and in the US. This is an issue EMC addresses in its February 2021 document called Public Procurement of Electric Vehicles, Recharging Infrastructures, and Related Products and Services in Canada. C'est pourquoi Mobilité électrique Canada.
That's why Electric Mobility Canada, in collaboration with other stakeholders in the Canadian sector, will officially announce in June the launching of a Canadian initiative on a ZEV supply chain alliance to help accelerate the industrial transition of Canada in electric transportation. Later on, if there's enough time, we can make 7 recommendations to help speed up the economic recovery and Canadian exports in the field of electric transportation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Breton. On to Mr. Potrak, President of Hélène. My apologies if I'm not pronouncing it properly. Please go ahead, sir.
Bonjour, je suis Martin.
Good morning. My name is Martin Potrak, President of Hélène. First of all, thank you to Terry Sheehan, the member for Sault Ste. Marie, for inviting me to take part in today's meeting of the Standing Committee on International Trade.
And Hélène is a real asset business with 2 core business lines that are synergistic. Each of these are positioned for significant growth as a result of the massive macro forces driving renewable energy production and the electrification.
I'm sorry, Mr. Potrak, my apologies to interrupt. We need to suspend the meeting for 5 minutes due to some technical difficulties we are having. So I will suspend the meeting for a couple of minutes until we can get the difficulties corrected. please start from the beginning again, please, sir. Thank you.
Yes, of course, no problem. Comme je disais, je suis Martin Porcharuc, le président d'Eliane.
So as I was saying, I'm Martin Porcharuc, and I'd like to thank Terry Sheehan, the member for Sault Ste. Marie, for inviting me to take part in the meeting of the Standing Committee on International Trade.
2010, and our business consists of two businesses. On one side, a core solar PV module business supported by a global supply chain and local advanced manufacturing capabilities that allows it to scale rapidly and arbitrage the latest evolving solar cell technologies to ensure these products are always market-leading quality and cost. Helian is in fact the only Tier 1 North American-based solar module producer as listed by Bloomberg due to its bankability. The second business is an emerging value-added integrated solar-powered product business, leveraging the knowledge gained in solar-powered and technology integration, having developed and positioned to grow an innovative pipeline of critical renewable products. Helian is in fact the only solar module producer in the world to have industrially produced solar modules that are launched to space to power satellites. We're here today to review how the state of play of Canada's international trade relationships has impacted Helian over the last several years. Specifically, Helian has had to contend with several challenging developments in the trade policy, first with China, and after that, and more importantly, with a neighbor to the south. On China, Helian and another Canadian solar module producer, CIIT, successfully prosecuted in 2015 an anti-dumping duty case against imports of Chinese solar modules into Canada. Such anti-dumping and countervailing case was just successfully renewed for another 5 years last March. The United States began to restrict Chinese solar cell and module access to this market through the imposition of steep anti-dumping and countervailing duties starting in 2012 and then again in 2014. Helian was a beneficiary of the US import market restrictions as a Canadian producer. That is, Helian distinct Canadian-made products were viewed as both attractive and politically correct by our US customers. Regrettably, the state of play changed dramatically and for the worst, beginning in 2017 with the arrival of the Trump administration. Following a Section 201 safeguard investigation, the U.S. International Trade Commission and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, conducted extensive investigations of the U.S. solar market and the role of imports in such market. Helian, together with other Canadian producers, successfully persuaded the ITC to recommend U.S. Trade Representatives to exclude U.S. imports of Canadian products from any safeguard relief adopted by the Trump administration. Notwithstanding, and in a first among many firsts in the Trump administration, and in blatant violation of the US obligations under NAFTA, President Trump elected on February 7, 2018, to include Canadian solar modules within his 4-year global safeguard measures. Specifically, and of greatest consternation and adverse financial impact to Helian and Canadian cleantech jobs, the safeguard imposed a declining tariff on 30% ad valorem on US imports of Canadian solar modules. It pains me to say that this is the same safeguard tariff rate applied to imports from China. This debilitating tariff against Canadian exports to the US, our main market, remains in force today, despite the best efforts of both the Government of Canada and Canadian industry. Though the tariff has now declined to 18%, pursuant to a further presidential proclamation that yet again refused to exclude Canadian imports from the safeguard measures. Our difficulties are particularly ironic because today, Helian employs 80 people in Minnesota, where we invested in a new factory in 2018. We're now actively seeking to expand our solar module manufacturing operations there, while in parallel, we'll restart a now defunct factory in the southeastern part of Florida. By the end of 2021, Helian will employ over 140 people in the US. We have developed detailed plans to expand our solar module manufacturing operations in Ontario and also in the United States, both in Minnesota and in Florida. But the safeguard tariff on the Canadian manufactured products continues to sap both our profits and our working capital. As such, and to be very blunt, Helian has much less leeway to make its planned investments both in Canada and the US to modernize its manufacturing operations, to expand its workforce, and to increase its contribution to the heightened and imperative efforts now ongoing to reduce greenhouse emissions and to combat climate change. On our issue, as just mentioned, on December 22nd, 2020, the government of Canada requested dispute settlement consultations with the United States under Chapter 31 of the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement. The arrival of the Biden administration and the entry into force of CUSMA, however, provide both Helian and Canada with the opportunity for a reset in our relations. My own view is that we can and indeed must reestablish a cooperative and productive trade relationship with the United States. But at the same time, Canada also must be firm in insisting that their neighbors should adhere strictly to its CUSMA obligations. The current status quo on this issue, coming from the previous US administration, simply is not acceptable and is costing Helian and its Northern Ontario employees dearly as we continue to pay an US import duty for our Canadian-made solar modules. I look forward to continue working with you and the government to resolve this time-sensitive matter. Ça conclut donc mon témoignage. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
This concludes my testimony. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. On to Mr. Signa from Carbon Upcycling Technologies, please. You have the floor.
I'll actually take it first. Thank you so much for inviting Carbon Upcycling to speak today. Canada has an amazing opportunity to be a leader in the export of clean technology, both on an industrial scale as well as on a consumer level. One of the strategies we've taken at Carbon Upcycling is to develop a consumer product brand called Expedition Air, which aims to bridge the gap between innovative climate solutions and the public perceptions of them. By creating products made from captured carbon emissions, we make novel innovation accessible to consumers with the goal of de-risking the uptake of these technologies from a buyer perspective. On a consumer product front, we've also partnered with product developers and manufacturers from over 6 countries outside of Canada, showing global buy-in of these materials made from captured carbon emissions. Our plan is to partner with larger brands to change the status quo on using these types of materials. We're currently in discussions with half a dozen companies that are interested in integrating Carbon Upcycling's materials into their supply chains. And these partnerships, because not a lot of companies are doing this type of consumer work, would make us, and in turn, Canada, a leader in consumer products made from waste material. I'll now pass off to Apoorv to discuss more of the industrial use of our technology.
Thank you, Madison. As a nation of just under 40 million people, we believe that Canada has already done quite a fair bit in terms of investing in carbon utilization technologies and moving the needle in terms of showing how carbon can be reused and enable a circular economy that we think we need to enable to hit our targets for 2050 and 2100. Over 4 of the recently concluded Carbon X Prize finalists were companies from Canada. And these were companies that were changing carbon emissions into construction products and into plastic materials and a range of other end products like the ones that Madison mentioned for consumer product use. Within the clean tech sphere, the idea and the notion of how export Africa and to a certain extent parts of Europe and the States, where cost can be the biggest driver. And looking at that from an export perspective, what's important to note is that the normal way of trading goods and services across the border, like having cars built in Ontario and sent over to the States, for example, is not something that translates very well to the context at hand. Instead, what is required is a long-term view as to what is required to build our society better and how to retrofit these very long-term facilities that run for anywhere from 30 to 50 years in a way that has got a Made in Canada tag on it. One silver lining in the way that the US tackled the COVID-19 pandemic was the Operation Warp Speed, where they were able to bring a whole range of resources together. And although their initial ways of, I guess, curbing the curve weren't as effective as they were in Canada, the way they were able to develop vaccines and build capacity to be able to roll that out at a rapid pace is something that no one else in the world has been able to achieve. We think that with the type of opportunities that Canada has already begun nucleating, like the clean tech export programs, there is a foundational element there that can be further evolved into a longer term partnership with our partners in Europe, in the States, as well as other parts of the world that are rapidly emerging and growing, such that these initial partnerships where companies like ours can go out to those regions for 2 to 3 months at a time and look at identifying local partners can actually be done over a longer period of 1 to 3 years and really enable companies with capacity issues, as most startup companies have, to translate these partnerships and these MOUs into longer term engagements where business is produced not only on the Canadian side, but on the partner side as well. I'd be more than happy over the questions to discuss some of the experiences we've had through Can Export and other programs. But would just like to finish by saying the space around clean tech and especially around circular economy and carbon emissions or carbon tech to be in a very, very exciting stage. Just in the last 4 months alone, we've seen major commitments come from companies like Lafarge and CEMEX and CRH, where they're talking about reducing the carbon emissions of their product by over 30 to 50%. There are other companies in plastics and a range of industrial products that have come in and talked about scope 1 and 2 carbon emission neutrality by 2030, or in some cases by 2050. Within that scope, Canadian entrepreneurs have already shown that they can play a massive part in helping these companies enable their achievement of these targets. And we're very excited about seeing how policy at the federal level can further support that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sina. On to the Canadian Nuclear Association, Mr. Gorman, President and Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Gorman, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the international trade opportunities associated with clean energy technology exports through the Canadian nuclear industry. Merci, Madame la Présidente et membres du comité.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you today, to speak to the issue of international trade and opportunities linked to exports of clean technology through the Canadian nuclear industry.
President of and CEO of the Canadian Nuclear Association for the past 2 years. Previous to that, I worked 7 years as President and CEO of the Canadian Solar Industries Association. I've been a developer of renewable energy projects, sat on the boards of utilities, and was Canada's representative to the International Energy Agency for solar. I've spent over 20 years championing Canadian clean energy solutions. As the members of this committee know and recognize, international trade is and will be a key component of Canada's efforts in recovering from the negative economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic. But international trade is also a key component to meeting climate change goals, especially the export of clean energy technologies that will assist high carbon emitting regions in their efforts to reduce emissions. In addition, there are significant geopolitical shifts occurring in international trade that represent opportunities, but also challenges that will impact all exporting sectors in Canada and beyond. But firstly, a brief introduction to the Canadian Nuclear Association and our membership. The CNA represents about 100 members across the nuclear industry. This includes uranium mining, nuclear utilities, and CANDU supply chain companies across Canada, the majority of which are in Saskatchewan, Ontario, and New Brunswick. The Canadian nuclear industry is key to meeting Canada's ambitious net zero target and climate change targets. As witnessed at the recent Climate Leaders Summit hosted by US President Biden, world leaders, including Prime Minister Trudeau, announced new and ambitious emissions targets that will require a strong role for all non-emitting technologies, including nuclear. For our industry, this represents a global opportunity for larger CANDU reactors, promoting uranium exports that offset emissions. It also includes supporting technology development efforts for small modular and very small modular reactors that provide opportunities for developing countries, remote regions, and high carbon industries to reduce emissions. The Canadian government has a significant role to play in partnership with the nuclear industry's efforts to deliver on the global transition to a low carbon economy by promoting and helping to develop the industry in Canada, and then smoothing the path for the international sale of uranium and nuclear goods and services. Nuclear power generation enables the clean electrification of other sectors and regions that have high carbon footprints. It also creates new economic opportunities that enable a clean energy transition that will bring economic and social benefits. For instance, Cameco is one of the world's largest uranium mining companies and is the largest employer of First Nations in northern Saskatchewan, which enables those communities to grow and flourish. Canadian uranium displaces the equivalent of some 550 million tons of CO2 and greenhouse gases per year. We're pleased that the federal government recognizes nuclear as being a key component of its climate plan, its hydrogen plan, and its small reactor action plan. Its inclusion in key programs such as the Strategic Innovation Fund and new Net Zero Accelerator that are administered by the Innovation, Science, and Economic Development will go a long way to promote clean energy technology solutions in Canada and beyond. There's a significant opportunity associated with enabling greater exports for nuclear. These include uranium exports, CANDU technology opportunities, as well as the emerging SMR market, small modular reactor market, all driven by the globe's efforts to meet the climate challenge. Wherever there is a CANDU nuclear power plant in the world, it's essentially a potential opportunity to export Canadian service and know-how and expertise. I would argue, as would your trade commissioners, that each existing power plant represents a trade priority, as are new build opportunities in existing and new markets, such as Romania. As well, there are opportunities to contribute to nuclear development beyond the CANDU brand, such as light water reactor development, waste recycling fuel in reactors, fusion, waste and decommissioning, and in the development of the isotope market. For small modular reactors, or SMRs, the domestic opportunity here is about $5.3 billion between now and 2040. The world market is going to be between $150 and $300 billion a year in the same time frame. Canadian workers and communities benefit every year from the revenues generated by Canada's investment in nuclear technology. There are further export opportunities Canadians can pursue from exporting uranium, CANDU technologies, their supply chain, SMRs, and isotopes. Examples of our member companies who export goods and services in these areas include Cameco, based in Saskatoon, which mines some of the planet's richest uranium deposits and exports their products worldwide. BWXT, which is based in Cambridge, manufactures steam generators and other power plant components for export to China and elsewhere. L3 Harris, based in Montreal, and Dorval, one of Canada's most diversified defense and security companies, which makes control room simulators for power plants. Nordion of Canada, a leading provider of medical isotopes and other health technologies. As committee members are likely aware, demand for clean energy is driving reactor technology to new frontiers, smaller and more advanced reactors. We liken this to the computer's transition from mainframe to laptop, a shift that dramatically changes not only the device itself, but also the range of applications it can be used for. Canadians and our federal government established an early lead in small modular reactors, with the 2018 SMR Roadmap project. As the world looks for ever more energy and ever more clean energy, these versatile clean units will be exported across national boundaries to meet real human needs. Our industry is very well positioned to be part of that story in the decades ahead. Overall, there is growing interest in key markets such as the Middle East, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Asia in Canadian technologies and in a Canadian presence. Romania, a member of the European Union and one of our NATO allies, is a country that chose Canadian technology several decades ago, and the decision paid off. Romania has had cleaner air with a more diversified energy mix, plus reliable, affordable electric energy that has helped raise its people's quality of life. Now Romanians are interested in doing it again by building 2 more CANDU plants at its Târnăvota site. But there's also a risk that other countries will seize most of the benefit of this opportunity if Canada cannot bring adequate export financing to the table, commensurate with the potential scope of Canada's value added to the project. There is significant competition in the global nuclear industry, particularly from countries like China and Russia, whose governments fully support nuclear exports through sovereign funding. There are opportunities in working with like-minded partnering countries like the United States that can create opportunities in countries such as Romania. Canada now has an opportunity in collaboration with the US to be part of this exciting multi-billion-dollar project at Târnăvota. But it's bigger than that. Canada and the US together can apply this model elsewhere in Eastern Europe to sustain Western technology leadership, compete with state actors while also cutting GHG emissions and displacing fossil fuels. The Canadian government needs to consider the following key points to enable more nuclear technology exports. First, supporting Canadian nuclear export potential with financial support commensurate with that which is being offered by the US and other countries with nuclear export potential. Second, continuing to include nuclear in its domestic climate, innovation, and economic policies. Thirdly, include nuclear clearly in trade promotion and trade policy discussions internationally. And lastly, facilitate export permitting processes to be efficient to take advantage of market opportunities as they arise. We look forward to working with the federal officials to ensure that the program's design and implementation meets the needs of the nuclear industry, that in turn will provide significant emissions reductions while enabling innovation and job growth. As this committee discusses international trade for Canada and considers the role of nuclear industry in its discussions, it is essential to understand that the Canadian uranium exports and the Canadian nuclear technology exports, specifically CANDU, have played a very significant role in enabling the development of key sectors in Canada. It's also enabled Canada to have a strategic asset in the nuclear industry that enables geopolitical discussions regarding trade and international relations. There is a significant opportunity for Canada to enable a greater role for the nuclear industry in terms of trade that would meet multiple goals: reducing emissions globally, increasing exports, creating more jobs, and fostering and reinforcing strategic relationships internationally. Thank you again, and I look forward to any questions the members may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gorman. On to Mr. Lobb for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for everybody who is attending the meeting today. First question is for Mr. Gorman. I'm just curious, in the small modular reactor market, where are we positioned in this country to really take advantage of that, and what are some of the companies or technology out there that is leading the way?
Thank you very much for the question. So firstly, let me say that Canada really does have a first mover advantage with small modular reactors. And I'd say this is because of the extraordinary initiative that has been undertaken by government and industry to coordinate their plans and to lay a pathway forward that involves the utilities, it involves the federal government, it involves 4 of the provinces, premiers of whom have signed a memorandum of understanding of development and deployment of small modular reactors. And it includes our regulator, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, which is quite literally a competitive advantage for Canada in the small modular reactor market. We have begun to see some funding through the federal government and through the CIIT fund for certain technologies, which is promising. However, we're going to need to see the federal government match the industry's contributions to this very detailed plan that we all share for Canada's leadership in the development and deployment of small modular reactors. The United States and the United Kingdom, while less organized than us on this SMR front, are beginning to bring some significant funding to the table, and they will soon catch up. So there's a little bit of co-opetition going on here. Lastly, to your question about technologies that are in Canada right now, we're one of the leading nations in the world. We are the leading nation in the world in terms of the number of technologies, both homegrown and international, going through our review and licensing process right now. We have 12 different technologies suited for different applications that are going through the process.
Okay, thanks very much. Another question is in regards to can-do work that would be around the world. What is the total dollar value of the licensing work and maintenance work for can-do every year? And then what are some other opportunities, like as far as new builds with can-do technology, in the next 10 years?
Thank you for the follow-up question. So I do not have the information regarding the sort of annual revenue generation coming from the can-do reactors and work that we have going on in seven different countries around the world right now. But I will ensure to follow up with the committee to provide that information. In terms of future can-do work, the one that is most immediate is the Romanian opportunity that I mentioned. There are other countries that are actively exploring can-do technology. The Americans have recently committed $8 billion to pursue the Romanian opportunity, and they are looking to Canada for a contribution of between $2 and $3 billion so that we can jointly build these two new units and refurbish their existing units.
Okay, and then maybe just give the committee an idea of the potential possibilities with isotopes and cancer therapies, et cetera, around the world. I don't know if you have those numbers, what the potential is for that, but Canada is really the world leader now, I think, in isotope production for cancer therapies.
It is. Canada is the world leader in isotope production for nuclear medicine, primarily in the treatment and diagnosis of cancer. It is also used in a wide variety of other nuclear and medical applications, including everything from diagnostics to sterilizing one-use medical equipment. We are doing some extraordinary innovation in nuclear isotopes right now that stem both from this very long history that we have with our nuclear laboratories, which have been producing isotopes through various sort of lab scale reactors, but very exciting work that is happening now with our conventional reactors, and in particular our CANDU reactors in Ontario, where innovations have allowed new forms of isotopes to be produced at a much higher scale on the conventional reactors themselves without interrupting operations. So the collaboration that is happening between our laboratories that are doing work on the isotope front and in collaboration now with the operators of our CANDU reactors is creating more opportunities for different isotopes at higher volumes to supply to the rest of the world.
Okay, and if I have time for one last question.
50 seconds, Mr. Law.
Okay, it's to Electric Mobility Canada. Obviously the raw materials, we have a lot of raw materials that would go into the different components of an electric battery, et cetera. I'm wondering, beyond the raw materials, does Canada have a competitive advantage in any particular sector at this point in regards to electric vehicles?
Building cars, building trucks. We have that in Canada.
Monsieur Breton, votre micro est pas à la hauteur de votre bouche.
Your microphone is not at the level of your mouth. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yes, we do have these advantages because there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of know-how in Canada regarding electric mobility, whether it's for trucks and buses, and we now have electric snowmobiles coming from Canada. So we have an advantage. And since we have the resources, the research center, and the assembly capacity, we do really have an advantage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Breton. On to Mr. Sheehan, please, for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all our presenters on presenting on this very important subject and how we're undertaking to try and increase our clean exports, across the world. And I'm going to start with Martine, and I appreciated your testimony and some of the great things that you are doing. In particular, what I found very, very neat was the solar panels that are being used in satellites, low orbiting satellites. So obviously, your technology is very superior, obviously, to be put on these billion-dollar satellites. I also wanted to reference and base my question on an article that you had written, an op-ed in the Hill Times, and you talked about the supply chain and where solar panels could also be deployed, and that there's some research and development going on around that. If you could expand as well, Martine, on opportunities, not only in satellites, but in electric vehicles and others, please.
Yes, so as I mentioned on the testimony, Helian developed together with SpaceX the low altitude satellite solar modules that are being launched into space with those satellites. We have another product that is a greenhouse integrated PV. So, for example, there is a greenhouse near Niagara where we utilize 4% of the roof to generate 10% of the energy requirement of the greenhouse. What that means is that we could size up systems to have net zero greenhouses going forward. So as many of us know, agriculture is one of the main contributors to greenhouse emissions. Therefore, by doing that and by advancing the integration of PV, of solar power generation into greenhouses, we can diminish the footprint of greenhouses in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Another one, possible utilization in which we are working is the integration of solar to actually generate renewable energy for electric vehicle charging. There are already, a few companies entering into the space. We know that this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure business in which we want to be part of.
And in the same article, you'd written that the price of solar panels have went down by about 90%, and that's good news over the last decade. But the tariff, in particular the American tariff, which is now at 18%, obviously you mentioned that it's cutting into obviously your working capital, but I saw on your website that you're investing 5 to 8% in R&D. I'm sure that could be affected, but that 18%, it's also a tax. Would you not agree, on Americans and Americans that purchase, our particular, solar panels? And I guess if you would delve down into advice, giving to the trade officials as they go forward with your suggestion of renewed optimism with the Biden administration, what advice would you be giving them to as well? I know that the minister in January had issued some statements and began a consultation process. So I'll just open it up there and let you delve into that a little bit, please.
So according to Chapter 31 of the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, there is a dispute resolution that has to take place if there is no agreement in between the Canadian and American government on taking off the unlawful import duties. So right now, I understand that there are ongoing conversations in between the Remedies Department of Foreign Affairs Canada and the U.S. Trade Representative Remedies Group. We are, as Canada, waiting to kick off that dispute resolution in an attempt to solve this issue amicably. There's only so much we can do as industry. We rely on government to bring this issue to the U.S. government as soon as possible. So we have been paying this tariff for 3.5 years. There was no possibility of amicable discussion with the Trump administration. So that's why right now, Foreign Affairs is en garde to start this dispute resolution as soon as possible, if there is no amicably possible way to do that.
Thank you very much to everyone. On to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for their contributions today. I have a question for Mr. Breton. We know, well, when you go around and you go to electric vehicle exhibits, you can see that Quebec really is a leader, and especially Quebec's small and medium-sized enterprises. But a great deal of the funding comes through the Strategic Innovation Fund. When you look at the numbers, most of the money goes to multinationals in Ontario and not to Quebec's innovative small and medium-sized enterprises. So should the criteria be reviewed? And if so, how? We favor an innovation fund for electric transportation, all the more because the Government of Canada in its climate plan, budget, and throne speech, and even during the Biden summit, said it wants to focus more on electric transportation. So it would make sense to invest more in that sector and to change the criteria so that more money flows to Canadian SMEs in Quebec and elsewhere, Nova Scotia, British Columbia, elsewhere. The company Tiger Motors was founded by 3 McGill students. They couldn't get money from the Canadian fund, so they had to go to the States to get investment money. So when it comes to electric transportation, innovation happens a lot with smaller startups, and we see that a lot also in the clean tech sector. That's why we think that SMEs should be made more eligible for the Strategic Innovation Fund. Well, that makes sense. But now we are stuck with the Buy American Act, and some of my colleagues on this committee sit on the Canada-U.S. Friendship Group, and they're looking at the Buy American provision. Do you think that we should have a Buy Canadian approach, and or should we try to have more integration with the U.S.? And if we focus more on Buy Canadian, would that violate our international trade rules? Well, at our company, we have a strategy based on Canadian electric transportation. We have a global vision. We don't have a piecemeal approach. And Europe is also adopting an overall vision. It's all the more important because Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden have said they want to work together on a Canada-U.S. EV transportation approach. Yes, there is the Buy American, but right now some of our members have sold to the U.S. and they've had to open their own plants in the U.S. because of Buy American. So we have to find a way, maybe some kind of a North American Act or approach so that Canada and the U.S. work together. It's urgent. We want to move forward quickly. Both Canada and the U.S. want to bring down their greenhouse gas emissions. We've only decreased our emissions by 1% in the last 10 years. We want to decrease them by 39% in the next many years. Canadians and Americans can only gain from collaboration, and also our auto market is integrated. But the U.S. could say, we don't need Canada. We have our own companies. We're doing really well when it comes to clean tech. How would Americans need Canada? Well, I think that we can work in collaboration. I was responsible for the Quebec government's electric transportation policy, and I encouraged the Quebec government to work with California. So we had complementary expertise when it comes to natural resources. Canada has strategic minerals and resources which the Americans want. Don't forget, as it now stands, 96% of batteries are made in China, Japan, and Korea. So for geopolitical reasons, for economic reasons, and environmental reasons, it makes sense for Canada and the U.S. to work together to have a North American EV approach, because right now we are very dependent on strategic resources and for our batteries on those three Asian countries. It's just like when we were dependent on Arab countries for our oil. We need to change our approach for electric transportation. When it comes to batteries, do you think that we can become autonomous here in Canada? Well, I don't think we can become completely autonomous, but we can decrease our dependence on Korean, Japanese, and Chinese batteries. We could develop our own expertise here as well. The Quebec and Canadian governments have made an announcement on creating a battery plant for the company Lyon. We've got all kinds of projects on the table, and Americans as well, because Americans have realized that when it comes to electric transportation, we need batteries, we need electric propulsion technology. So we need to build on our advantages. And at the end of the day, it's a national security issue. So we should be able to control our own resources. Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, is my time up? You've just turned on your mic.
Yes, it is. On to Mr. Blakey for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us here today. I know some of you touched on this in your opening remarks, but of course you know that the reason we're here is to be able to make some concrete recommendations to government about what they might be able to do in order to help foster success in Canada's clean energy economy and increase export. So I'm just wondering if our witnesses would like to take this time to kind of be quite specific about what kinds of things they think that the committee ought to be recommending to government toward that end. And I see that Mr. Puchtarik has his hand up, so we can start with you, Mr. Puchtarik, and then go down the line.
Certainly, thank you. We have been paying an U.S. import duty since February 2018. So there is a very concrete action to be taken for Canadian solar modules being exported to the U.S., which is work with USTR to exclude Canada from such import duty, whether it is in an amicable way to be done right away, or otherwise just trigger the dispute resolution on the USMCA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next hand up I see on the screen is Monsieur Breton. So over to you, please.
Yes, well, as we said, we think that working on a North American act would trigger a lot of growth for Canadian industries, especially since the Biden administration talks more and more about the EV industry, getting more electric vehicles from light to heavy duty on U.S. roads, creating American jobs. But as we know, we have an integrated market for light duty vehicles, especially where in Ontario, many companies, build parts of pickup trucks, SUVs, and we are about to build electric vehicles in Ontario, and we are building right now electric vehicles in Manitoba, in Quebec. So we think that the North American Act could be something that could work really well. We have to make sure that for national security reasons, we can have access to our strategic minerals and metals. Because if we end up just exporting them to other markets to come back up with as finished products, we'll end up just importing the technologies and the batteries. To us, that's very important.
Can I just follow up on that to ask, I mean, obviously Canada, the United States, and Mexico just went through a pretty intensive round of bargaining leading up to CUSMA, and there were concerns that would sometimes crop up there where, Canada and the US, well, certainly Canadians would have liked to have had a more collaborative relationship with the US on some files, but the US, or what was perceived to be US response to Mexico, sometimes complicated those things. So when we talk about a North America Act, does that vision include Mexico? In what ways do you think that might complicate some of the supply chain relationships that you're talking about between Canadian and US producers, and what might be done about that?
That's a good question. I think it would be best to include Mexico in that, because we already have Mexico as a partner with Canada and US. And when we're talking about the auto industry, I mean, it's a relationship that builds between Canada, US, and Mexico. But the technology, the knowledge that we have in Canada is worth something. The natural resources that we have is worth something. And as I said, with the Biden administration really pushing for a transition towards EVs, light or heavy duty, we think that the time is perfect, because we just saw an agreement between President Biden and the Prime Minister Trudeau regarding the development of EVs in collaboration with Canada. But I think Mexico could be included in that very well.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. How much time do I have remaining?
1 minute, 25 seconds.
Okay, over to Mr. Sina. I see he has his hand up as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of specific recommendations, one recommendation I would have is actually road mapping a certain collaboration either with the US or the EU bloc, specifically to look at a time horizon of 2 to 4 years around adopting industrial retrofits or new industrial technologies. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I think carbon technology and the space that we play in is pretty unique in that you're dealing with very long payback periods for some of the installations that are being affected. And our experience thus far has been that as we've looked at business development internationally, a lot of the kind of licensing or kind of commercialization endeavors that we look at are looked at over a decade long horizon, if not longer. And so to be able to have the ability to look at how employment in those two associated countries could work for a business development rep or a technology rep or whatnot, I think would be quite helpful. So having a program that doesn't just look at a 3 or 6 month program, but rather a 3-year framework of engagement would be very helpful from our perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Sin. Now on to Ms. Gray for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. The first questions that I have are for Mr. Breton. And we heard President Biden say last week that any exemptions to Buy America would be, quote, strenuously limited, which could be a real concern for our integrated supply chains. This is some of the strongest wording that we've heard. And you actually spoke about this already today, and had mentioned that there were already some job losses and some businesses potentially moving to the U.S. So do you have an idea as to how many job losses we've had already, or what this might mean for future job losses or businesses having to move to the U.S.?
No, I couldn't tell you that we are losing jobs in electric mobility, because right now we are creating jobs in electric mobility. I mean, the transition is going from fossil fuel to renewable and electric mobility. So this is not something that we are talking about. I mean, we're actually looking for qualified people. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and right away, right now, we are having problems finding enough qualified people. So it's going to be an issue for years to come. But if we want to create Canadian jobs and do the transition from fossil fuel to clean technology, clean transportation, if we end up being in a position where most companies have to move south or open plants down south because of the Buy American Act, that's for sure that we will lose many, many jobs that would have been created in Canada. I don't have the numbers yet because it's too early to tell. We don't have all the details, but that's an issue of concern to many of EMC's members.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Would you feel that it's important to work with the Biden administration to work on standardizing regulations to strengthen vehicle emission standards? There's no doubt, of course, that our supply chains are integrated. So would that be something that would be important to work on?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because we think that having different standards, and it's an issue. We've seen that in all other technologies and other industries. Having technologies that where the regulation is not integrated is a real problem. And we see, those of you who are old enough, I remember VHS versus Beta. In electric mobility, we have kind of that issue. We have like 3 standards, 4 standards on the way we charge vehicles. So we need to have, standardized regulations and standardized codes and standards so that we can accelerate electric mobility across the board from light to heavy duty vehicles.
Great, thank you. And one more question, of course, with clean tech being an emerging industry, and there's a chance it may not be fully accounted for in our trade agreements when it comes to regulatory cooperation and non-tariff barriers. So have you faced any regulatory hurdles or non-tariff barriers in exporting your products?
Are you asking that question to me again?
Yes.
Okay. We have. I could get into more details into that with the document that I could send to you, but yes, we have. Because we are seeing that, EVs are a new market. So there's a lot of adjustment to be done, whether it's at the utility side or the infrastructure side or the regulatory side. So that's something that we could work on a document and send it to you if you want, because there are issues with that.
Great, thank you very much. And it would be wonderful if you could table that with this committee for us all to see, and then that'll be actually part of your testimony. So that would be great. Thank you. Similar question. I'm wondering if any of the other witnesses here would like to answer that specifically around if they're having issues with regulatory burdens or non-tariff barriers with export. And I see Mr. Pochard.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, we have been paying, millions of dollars a year. So solar modules are being taxed to be imported into the U.S. This is a extremely urgent matter that we need government to concentrate on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Gorman, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So the conventional nuclear and can-do technology, but in most nations has been sort of a proprietary thing. This is a comment on the regulatory side. With the advent of small modular reactors, which are involving, technology providers from all over the world, there are, over 70 different technologies being developed right now. It means that we have to try to streamline regulatory treatment so that we're getting common recognition for the different technologies that are out there, and we avoid having every nation reinventing the wheel each time it tries to qualify a new one of these new technologies. So
thank you very much, Mr. Gorman. On to Ms. Bendayan for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just before beginning to ask questions of our wonderful witnesses here today, I just wanted to clarify something that Ms. Gray said. She mentioned President Biden's speech to Congress of a few days ago, and he was referring to Buy American, which I believe all members of the committee know Canada is largely exempt from, and the issue, of course, of Buy America is very real, and our government is working very hard to secure exemptions for Buy America. But his comments were with respect to something different. Je vais peut-être commencer avec Monsieur Breton.
I'll begin with Mr. Breton. Mr. Breton, thank you for being here at the committee. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I have to quickly come back on what a colleague said on the Strategic Innovation Fund. I am the parliamentary secretary to the minister, and I care deeply about the small and medium-sized businesses in Canada, which in fact paid out over $750 million to Quebec and Canadian small and medium-sized businesses. In fact, you already mentioned Lion, this company, which is the pride of Quebec. We also announced an investment of $50 million to help Lion build a new plant, a new battery plant. So I would like to know whether you feel that these investments for companies like Lion will help us spread the innovations made by Canadian companies around the world. And of course, I'm referring to specifically innovation in the field of electric transportation. Yes, clearly, I think that the Strategic Innovation Fund is important. It's interesting. But as I was saying, we have to make sure that not only huge corporations receive money from the fund, that smaller companies do as well. But that's not always easy. I remember that there was an automotive innovation fund, but that money went mostly to large auto manufacturers. That was $75 million. I think there's been progress when it comes to the Strategic Innovation Fund, but I think it should be easier for small, innovative companies to access that funding. I was talking about startups, and I mentioned an example earlier, 3 McGill University students who tried to build an electric skidoo. Nobody believed in them. 2 or 3 people did, but today there's a plant in Shawinigan building these electric skidoos. So it's really important to focus on that type of work. As I said, here in Canada, in Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, we have people who work with Tesla, and all these places have research centers which should be much more known. We have R&D with Ballard Power on hydrogen technology. We are world leaders in that field. So I think a fund like the Strategic Innovation Fund should really focus more on smaller businesses. And I'm not only talking about electric transportation, I'm also talking about infrastructure, because we need smart, innovative infrastructure as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Breton.
Opportunity to comment on the CAN Export program and your experience with it. You mentioned it in your opening statement. We're certainly looking to always improve, but would be very interested to hear what your experience was with this program.
I'm sorry, who was this question directed to?
Mr. Sina?
Sorry, I only heard the second half of the question. Which program are we talking about?
You mentioned CAN Export.
Yes, I think, tangibly, I think I can share one story with you on the CAN Export program for when we visited France, and we're looking at some partnerships there. I think that has been probably one of the more successful engagements that we've had with a government program, in the sense that during that trip back in 2015, if memory serves, we had just begun looking at the potential application of our technology within the construction market. And Lafarge Holcim, the large conglomerate, at the time, the merger hadn't been finalized with Holcim, but Lafarge in itself was the largest cement company in the world. And we had just begun some initial discussions with them on what type of data and information they would need to further evaluate our technology's relevance to their business. And the CAN Export program, and being able to actually go out there, not just to Paris to meet with some of their corporate team, but also to Lyon, where they had their center of research, was pretty instrumental in creating kind of a long-term engagement with them. Specifically, I think the timing worked out pretty well, because they were just in the process of launching an internal accelerator program where they wanted to identify a handful of global companies to help with various aspects of their supply chain, which went from everywhere, from everything to ranging from construction site schedule management to supply chains and how they can be more effective with their materials. And we
thank
fit
you
into
very
that.
much. Thank you very much, Susina. As you can see, everything is timing here.
Sounds good.
On to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, je voudrais en fait continuer la conversation.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up where we left off with Mr. Le Breton. Sir, you talked about national security. Unfortunately, geopolitics is involved here. It's complex. You talked about national security. You talked about oil from the Middle East. But at the end of the day, the refineries are the ones who source their oil. But when it comes to the issue we're talking about, can you make the link with national security? Well, we're talking about major change in transportation towards green technology and clean technology. 26% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions come from oil and gas and 25% from transportation. So over 50% of greenhouse gas emissions are due to those two things. And within the next 10 years or so, I wouldn't be surprised if transportation would be a greater source of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's all the more important to transfer that sector to green technology. Now, if batteries are made in places where we don't have a lot of control, it could have huge implications for us. For instance, right now, there are not enough microchips around the world, and they're used in computers and cars and so many other consumer products. So for national security reasons, we could try to make sure that we have the natural resources that will go into electric transportation, such as electrical cars. So I talked about microchips, which are used in everything. And we've seen the United States, for instance, impose national security as a reason to keep production at home. And we also have a potash company in Saskatchewan, I believe, which has national security implications. We can't let foreign companies raid our natural resources, transform them, and then we are forced to buy back something made with our natural resources. Thank you.
Blakey for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I guess I'll just go back to my initial question. I know Mr. Gorman was waiting to answer as well in terms of what some of the particular recommendations this committee might make to government would be from his point of view. So I'll pass it over to Mr. Gorman for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blakey. Well, I would start by saying that as the world moves to decarbonize and as we work to a net zero 2050 future, we're seeing that economic opportunities globally are going to be stemming from that area. And nations like ours have two challenges. One is how do we decarbonize here at home, and then how do we help other nations around the world decarbonize so we can hit that target? And of course, aside from making a safer, better world, there's economic opportunity to be had. So in these instances, at first to decarbonize here at home, we're either going to be using our own technology, like some of the presenters here before you today, where we have expertise, or we're going to be importing technologies from elsewhere. And of course, when it comes to helping other nations, we're going to need to look to the technologies where we have a depth of expertise and real potential to help them. And so I'd submit to you that nuclear, where we're a tier 1 nation, widely regarded as one of the best nuclear operators in the world. We also have one of the healthiest nuclear ecosystems of any country in the world right now because of the refurbishments that are going on here of all of our nuclear units in Ontario. We 76,000 people, $17.3 billion of of money going to the GDP each year. And we're using that very healthy ecosystem to do some incredible innovations in conventional nuclear, but also these small modular reactors. So I'd say small modular reactors are going to enable us to decarbonize some of the hardest areas to decarbonize: heavy industry, oil and gas extraction, mining, help First Nations. And then if we can use those niche technologies where we've got that expertise to help other nations, we'll be able to not only help them decarbonize, but benefit economically. So support the industries that we can bring abroad as well as help here at home.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gorman. On to Mr. Abatai for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to all of our witnesses this morning. ECT equal about 3.5% of the GDP. It's still shy. We do have a trade deficit, overall trade deficit. United States is still by far our largest in that regard, which is equal to about 70%. And we have other markets. As far as the Asian market, we have complete almost a trade deficit in this regard. So basically, we do import more than we export. So in this case, we will have to start looking at where our strength lay as far as Canada, and there is 3 areas of industries were represented today here: the oil and gas, resources, and nuclear. So the question is to the oil and gas, to Ms. Savalon and Mr. Sinha, on where is this industry, the carbon capture industry. We know in Alberta we are a leader in that, and as well as I think Saskatchewan. So how much, where's the hope? I believe that this is an industry that is going to really help to produce more over and above the net zero on trade that we're looking for. I'm going to call it the net zero on trade. So a brief on that would be great by both of you. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to be succinct this time. I totally agree with you. I think that there is a strong opportunity for some of the experience that Albertans and people across the prairies, frankly, including in BC, have built around LNG infrastructure and oil and gas, both heavy and light. A lot of that skill can be translated for use in carbon capture and storage. And a lot of it can go towards areas around decarbonizing industrial sources such as coal power plants, which are still unfortunately growing in many parts of Asia. We've already seen that some of that is happening. In terms of how that could be used as a way of creating a trade surplus, the key there is creating business models where the know-how can be taken over. Stantec, one of the largest engineering companies in the world, is based in Edmonton. By leveraging some of the partnerships and technologies that they have with startups like ours, and not necessarily just Stantec, but other Canadian engineering firms like Hatch as well, they can be great catalysts for bringing these technologies out to those regions, such as China and Indonesia and other areas, and essentially help these specific organizations there create the new plants, essentially the modern versions of like an ethylene cracker or a distillation column, and start creating royalty-based structures where the know-how can actually be moved from Canada over to these areas. We think that that is going to be the future, because we cannot be taking carbon emissions, Chinese carbon emissions, and capturing them in Canada, but we can take the technology over and create those long-term business relationships.
Well, exactly, like 2 birds and with 1 stone here. We do have the technology. We are leaders, world leader on that. So first of all, we can help ourselves to achieve better environmental standards, overall the 2050 goal. And on the other side, we can sell this technology overseas while we still maintain some control over it. What the government should do in this? I mean, I have a plant here not far from Edmonton that, with $55 million a year for the next 10 years, they will be able to pull they will be able to capture enough carbon to almost equal to 320 100,000 vehicles pull out off the road. So I'm sure you're aware of these good stories. What the government should do. Shouldn't the government step up and help these industries?
I would have two recommendations. One would be that there has to be some sort of a framework with specific countries in Asia. I think Indonesia, China, India turn out to be probably the most important levers. There has to be some kind of an arrangement where the adoption of carbon technology from Canada in those areas can be promoted somehow. If that's done through some sort of an incentive or by using the employment agreement that by the adoption of Canadian technologies, more jobs in these countries can be produced. I think that could be a very interesting angle to promote localized decarbonization methods. The second piece is something similar to the low carbon fuel standards in California. I think something like that adopted in Canada could be interesting for direct air capture. One of the interesting things about how that is gathering momentum is we can capture carbon emissions in Canada that were produced elsewhere in the world. So if we can promote some kind of a framework where direct air capture mechanisms are being supported by LCFS or a similar mechanism in Canada, then it basically means that we can create Canadian jobs cleaning up Chinese pollution.
Thank you, Mr. Sina. On to Mr. Sarai for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I apologize, my camera was off and I didn't even realize that I was listening to you with my camera off after the brief intermission, so excuse that. My first question is to Mr. Breton. Budget 2021, we've proposed a 50% reduction on corporate taxes on clean tech manufacturing. Do you think this will help, or how will this? Maybe you can elaborate. How will this help or induce more investment in this sector or create jobs, and if so, how?
It will absolutely help. We are already seeing the results of that from member companies, from EMCs. So electric mobility is all about innovation. So to have people working in clean tech getting a 50% reduction in tax, will make a difference, because we are seeing more and more companies being able to get some funding from financial institutions. The thing is, though, that when we are seeing more and more money coming from financial institutions or potential funders, a lot of that money comes from the U.S. So there's still an issue here regarding to the way that we can find Canadian seed money to invest in these technologies, because many of these funders want the companies or the plants to go to the U.S. because the money comes from the U.S. So to me, that's a good step. That's a great step in the right direction, actually. But we have to find ways to leverage Canadian money into investing in clean technologies and clean transportation.
Thank you. So what is your suggestion in order to, we can't stop money from being invested in this sector, but we can give inducements like this tax break. What are other ways to keep that investment, whether it's foreign or Canadian, and have that manufacturing right here in Canada?
Well, we think that the Canada Infrastructure Bank could play a role in funding some of those projects. We've seen that in Quebec with Investissement Québec. That's something that we could be working on. And we think that Canadian banks, could have some incentives into investing in Canadian clean tech. We know that Canadian banks have invested a lot of money into oil and gas, because it's a core business of Canada. We understand that, but we think that the Canadian banks could get some privileged solutions, I would say, from the Canadian government to invest in clean tech.
Thank you. My next question is Mr. Poktarek from Helene. I just want to know, why are solar panels, when you export to them, U.S. tariffed? Are they tariffed because they have a significant amount of the components made in China or other places that are tariffed in the U.S., or is there some other factor into that? I've met some other Canadian solar manufacturers before. That was my understanding. I just want some clarity on that.
Of course. No, we do not use Chinese solar cells. Chinese solar cells will have an anti-dumping and countervailing duty if we do include them. Canadian exports to the US were never over 2% of total imports. So the International Trade Commission, on their assessment during the Section 201 tariff investigation back in 2017, actually concluded that Canadian exports were not producing injury. So the International Trade Commission actually agreed with us that Canadian exports shouldn't have not been included. However, U.S. Representative Ambassador Lighthizer then and President Trump actually did include Canada and everybody, right? So it was a catch-all type.
So is that still pending, or
it is still going? So right now we're paying 18%. That is still happening. So that has not been resolved. So we have an opportunity to resolve it now with the Biden administration. Excuse me.
Thank you. My next question is to Mr. Sina.
30 seconds, Mr. Sarai.
Thank you, Chair. You have seems like an amazing technology that to reduce the carbon footprint. How can the government help you export this more broadly as cement's used globally, and if we can reduce double digits in greenhouse gas emissions globally from a major contributor, this would be something very good for the world. Canada.
We could get a brief answer, please.
Yes, I think the main framework is a 4 to 5 year game plan on engaging with industrial partners in other countries. I'd be happy to talk about them more offline, but currently there's no precedence for this.
Thank you very much. If you could submit
something, that would be great. Thank you.
Terrific. If you can submit it to the clerk, Mr. Senior, we'd appreciate it. On to Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. Some really, really good testimony this morning. My first question is to Mr. Breton, through you, Madam Chair. So I'm fortunate enough to sit on our Conservative Auto Caucus, as well as to be part of the CAM committee. So it's a special committee between Canada and U.S. economic relations recovery. And I was listening very intensely to what you were talking about, all the job creation and those types of things. And I also recently had a conversation with the Canadian global manufacturers, auto manufacturers. And I do understand there to be about 121 new EV models by 2030 coming to the market. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I know my riding of Essex is down by Windsor, so it's next to the busiest international border crossing in North America. Yeah. And I know that our manufacturers, so our tier twos, they're actually hemorrhaging jobs to the United States. Yeah. Because they can't get people being commerce across the board. They can't get clients in and get them back over. And if they do, they have to quarantine for 14 days or pay very, very hefty fines. These same manufacturers, I'm assuming, are going to be building all of the parts for your clean technology to go into new vehicles, but still under the major players in the world when it comes to auto. Have you run into that issue yet? Are you concerned about that? Is there any thoughts?
Okay. Just to make sure I understand, are you talking about the fact that because of COVID, there are some problems really going from the US to Canada and vice versa?
Exactly.
Well, we have seen a bit of that. Hopefully this is something that will be resolved over the next few months. We're all crossing our fingers, but things are starting to look better. But I'm not sure I've seen or I've heard much of that so far, honestly. I've talked to people who build electric buses and cars, and they go across the border, but the quarantine is an issue, but I don't think it's such a big issue. Actually, between us, to be totally honest, the real issue is going to be finding qualified people to be able to get those jobs. The transition, as I said, we are looking for a lot of new and qualified people, whether it's for mining and research and development, engineering, chemists, but assembly as well. This is already an issue. We have companies in the middle of a pandemic who can't find enough qualified people. So just imagine what after the pandemic it will be. So that's why we have to invest seriously into training and retraining workers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Breton. Through you again, straight back to Mr. Breton, please. When it comes to products moving back and forth across the border, so I know that I believe for one automobile, as an example, a part can go back and forth across the border up to 7 times.
Yeah.
And so in essence, I'm kind of leaning on the Buy America, Buy American right now. So in essence, many of our Canadian manufacturers, we're actually buying the raw goods, the raw products from the United States to assemble, to ship back to the United States in order to fill major voids that they have on their side.
Yeah.
What can we do? What can we do to ensure that from the business world, it's only a good deal if it's good for both sides. And I do believe there's a bit of a bias here in that we have the opportunity to buy their goods to turn around to sell back to them. What can we do as a government, as a committee, quite frankly, to bridge that gap, to make it fairer for Canadian businesses?
Well, I think that honestly, because of the fact that we have a lot of knowledge in Canada regarding electric mobility, whether it's for light or heavy duty, we have research centers, but we have the mineral and material that the Americans need. I mean, a lot of the stuff that goes into clean technology and clean cars is in mining areas in Canada. And I mean, this is not a coincidence that President Biden decided to talk about a U.S.-Canada agreement on electric mobility and EVs and batteries, because we have these materials. So I think that for us, it's a negotiation point, because we can use that to say, let's work together in building a North American EV strategy that will make us stronger. Because since Europe has started their strategy, I mean, electric vehicle sales have gone way up. I mean, now they've passed in front of China last year, while we were in the middle of a pandemic. So because, as I said before, for geopolitical implications as well as economic implications, we have to work together with the U.S. and we have what people are looking for. Because right now, as I said, most mining and refining of these critical minerals and metals are made in Asia, especially in China. So we have to ensure our economic stability and have some previsibility, from an economic standpoint for the EV world.
Thank you, Mr. Breton. On to Mr. Raya for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question will be for Mr. Daniel Breton. Mr. Breton, what you have talked about, the national security issue, it is so important. Unfortunately, many Canadians are still not aware of what is happening in the energy world.
Yeah.
When you talk about batteries, I'm sure that and many others may know that it is not just limited to electric vehicles, but you're also talking of batteries for the energy storage, which greatly improves the viability of a lot of renewable energy generation. That is also you're talking about. And the most $1 trillion transportation segment is moving fast. And unfortunately, many Canadians are still not aware of what is happening there. And I'm so glad that you are here talking about these things. And, Canada and the US recently agreed to strengthen the Canada-US Joint Action Plan on critical minerals collaboration, which you also mentioned. We have some of the rare minerals and other critical minerals for battery generation. This joint action plan to target, a net zero industrial transformation, batteries for zero emission vehicles, renewable energy storage, that we have agreed with the US. And many Canadians are not aware that in the recent budget, we have proposed a critical battery mineral center of excellence at the Natural Resources Canada. This would coordinate federal policies and programs on critical minerals and work with provinces, territories, and other partners. That is also very important. And in the recent budget, again, many Canadians are not aware that we have invested for the federal research and development to advance critical battery mineral processing and refining expertise. My question to you, Mr. Breton, is in the US, which US has also only recently woken up to the fact that battery manufacturing is critical, whereas in the world, I think as of today, 70% of the manufacturing capacity is still in China. and some technologies with some Japanese manufacturers and Korean manufacturers. If I am not wrong, in US as of today, there are about 5 major battery manufacturing facilities with investment over $2 billion each. So it is very critical, and I'm glad that you're talking about. Can you let us know, or can you re-emphasize what we need to do? I have personally been calling for a Canada-wide task force to make sure that we have a comprehensive strategy to develop minerals, to develop technologies, and to develop manufacturing industry in batteries. Can you re-emphasize what is that we need to look from the short, medium, and long term on the issues of batteries development, which, as you rightly have pointed out several times, is a national security issue?
Yeah. Well, thank you for talking about that. To me, it's very important. I've said it many times over the past years, but regarding the critical minerals and metals, actually, I remember the first people that I heard talk about that were coming from the Pentagon, from the US government, because they said for national security reasons, we have to look into that, because if not, it's not just for electric vehicles and renewables, it's also for the military, when we're talking about strategic minerals and metals. So that's why it's so important for geopolitical reasons. We at EMC obviously are not in the arms business, but when we talk about developing a Canadian electric mobility strategy, it's to make sure that we understand the whole ecosystem of electric mobility that range from light-duty vehicles to heavy-duty vehicles, from mining to assembly to research and development. And we don't have that now. I was in charge, actually, of the first electric mobility strategy in Canada when I was in the government of Quebec, in Quebec, back almost 10 years ago. So now we have we need a comprehensive plan for Canada. And that's why I'm really proud to say that in collaboration with other stakeholders in Canada, we will announce in June as a Canadian ZAF Supply Chain Alliance to work together to come up with a plan for the Canadian industry to talk with the Canadian government.
My time is limited.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ryan, your time is up. Mr.
I'm really sorry.
Thank you all for some very valuable information. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, merci.
Thank you. Mr. Breton, you were saying a little earlier that a policy does not necessarily mean programs and money. What exactly is a consistent policy that makes sense in an area like this one? Well, once you have a policy, you need a strategy or an action plan. This means that there are stages which include a timetable and investments over that timetable. That's what the government of Quebec did. That's what European governments are doing now, and China is way ahead of us there. There are 100 electric buses in Canada and 100 million in China. One thing that surprises me is that we hear a lot about climate change and carbon footprint, and that's all very well and good. But don't forget, we're also talking about air pollution. The biggest killer on Earth is air pollution. That is what comes out of the exhaust of cars or smokestacks. A few months ago, a study was published. It was last February, and it estimated the cost of air pollution at $120 billion a year. So if we transition towards clean energy and clean transportation, it means we'll save thousands of lives. There are 1,330 deaths due to air pollution each year. So that's 8 times more than people who die in vehicle crashes. We would also improve the quality of life of people and save hundreds of millions of dollars. This can all happen if we create green transportation technologies, and we'll be able to export those technologies, which will cause economic growth. And we often forget that aspect of air pollution. Madam Chair, do I still have any time left? Well, I'd like you to extrapolate on what you just said. You may have heard that in the last few years, People are saying that electric vehicles pollute as much as vehicles that use gas. What do you think of that? Well, I read a book. It came out 2 weeks ago on electric vehicles. It's a 6th book I've authored. Well, the fact is that clean vehicles pollute less regardless of where you are and where the electricity is generated, regardless where. Electric vehicles are always cleaner than gas-powered vehicles, and they're becoming cleaner all the time. Thank you very much.
Becky, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur Breton, pour...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Breton, do you think you can tell us a little more about that precise topic and how the arguments which say that electric vehicles are more polluting are wrong? Well, in reality, electric vehicles pollute less and less because electricity production sources are becoming cleaner and greener. In 2009 in the U.S., an EV polluted less than a fuel-operated vehicle in half the states for 40% of the population. And last year in the U.S., an EV polluted less than a fuel-operated vehicle for 94% of the U.S. population in 42 of the 50 U.S. states. And in the other 8 states, there are hybrid vehicles. So all of these EVs pollute less than fuel vehicles in the United States. I work with the Canada Research Council, and whether you're in Alberta, where 90% of electricity is generated through fossil fuels, or Quebec or Ontario, regardless of where you are, EVs are going to emit less greenhouse gases than fuel vehicles. A little earlier, we were talking about the price of solar panels, which has come down. Well, since 2010, the cost of auto vehicles has fallen by 90%, and we expect that to continue by 2024-25. So that price will go down by 50%. So electric vehicles by 2024-25 will be on the same level as fuel vehicles. As well, we're talking of a decrease between 2013 and 2019 of 65% of greenhouse gas emissions by kilowatt hours for batteries. Between now and 2025, another decrease of 50%. Since these batteries are recyclable up to 95% of the parts, whereas fossil fuels are not, there's going to be an exponential decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. Electric vehicles perform better, are becoming cleaner, but fuel-generated vehicles cannot follow that pace. Thank you, Mr. Breton. Thank you, Madam Chair.
On to Mr. Lobb for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question to Mr. Breton, and it's I know there's been some talk about what's cleaner and what isn't cleaner and all that. One question I have for you is really the first generation of electric vehicles in mass. They will be coming to the end of their life in the next 5 to 7 years, likely. Yeah. And there's going to be thousands or tens of thousands, I suppose, of the batteries. First question is, what's the plan for those? And the second question is, does Canada have an opportunity to be kind of a world leader in the breakdown and recycling of those batteries? So 2-part question there.
Okay, so well, the plan is for companies who work with manufacturers to recycle batteries. There are 2 very important companies. One is called Li-Cycle in Ontario and Lithion in Quebec, who work on recycling batteries for electric vehicles, and they can recycle up to 95% of the components of the batteries, which means it's a real plus, because once you have once you get back those materials, you can build batteries for a cheaper price, and you don't have to go back and mine more materials. As I said before, what's very different when you compare an electric vehicle to a gas vehicle is that once the gas is burnt, well, you can't recycle it. So there's a big difference there, and there's a big plus.
Great, thank you. My Next question is for Helene. And I know we've talked about the issues with the tariffs into the United States, et cetera, which is unfortunate. When you're looking at the rest of the world, and maybe I missed this in your discussions, where have you identified some areas of the world that you have a natural ability to sell into, or where you think you're going to increase your sales as years move forward?
Thank you. We have to steer away from where the Chinese are the leaders, right? So what that means is staying within North America, so going into Mexico, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So the Caribbean is an area where Canadian engineering companies are very strong. So we have to rely on that. So once we get out of the immediate geographic area, I would say Sub-Saharan Africa. So all of the African continent, really.
Okay, and maybe again, I apologize if I missed this. Are you currently selling into those markets at this time, or this is something you've identified?
So we have been selling into the Caribbean for 10 years. We have been able to sell in Europe, from Western Europe all the way to Japan on the last 10 years. Right now, we have concentrated in the US because it's the median market for a private small company that is more affordable. So thinking outside of the box, that's why I think Africa outside of Latin America and the Caribbean should be our target. We have not been able to export there yet.
Okay, and with the carbon upcycling technologies company, the cement side of it must be just phenomenal, and the opportunity there. So I know you don't want to tell us how many dollars a year in sales you're doing on that product, but I guess what I'm saying is, and again, if I missed this, I apologize too, but is this something you're selling around the world, or because of the cost of shipping, you're kind of Western Canada based, or is this something you can sell all over North America?
Yeah, the business model will be licensing the technology because concrete is a very localized product.
Mr. Sina, could you adjust your microphone?
Sorry. Hello?
Yes, that's
it is a very localized product. Usually cement will usually move thousands of miles, but concrete in particular only moves in a 100 to 200 mile radius. Our business model is to license the technology so that these companies can adopt this new way of making these lower carbon materials and use them locally. So essentially, we're looking at a model which would be more like an engineering company that's providing a novel technology or a service.
Okay. You have 30 seconds,
Chair.
Mr. Lobb.
Okay, and what areas are you located currently then? Is it just in Alberta, or do you have other locations?
We're currently actively selling into the Western Canadian market, primarily in Calgary and the Southern Alberta market, but we are very late stage in some licensing agreements with a couple of groups in the US, one in Europe and one in Asia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sina. On to Mr. Dhaliwal, please, for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you, and thank you to all the presenters, and particularly for the companies that they are playing a key role to make Canada as world leader when it comes to environment and clean technologies. My question, Madam Chair, will go to Helene and carbon upcycling technologies. We know that clean tech is growing market worldwide, as mentioned earlier, and that is the reason our government has put $21 million over the next 5 years investments into this budget, and $4.3 million are going to trade commission services to promote Canadian clean tech abroad. I would like to ask, how about your work experience with the TCS to access new market sales?
So to start, I mean, it has been excellent. So we have used, if I go back to 2013, the service of the Foreign Affairs local group in Japan, and that allowed us to export to Japan then. So there is, installation in the southern island of Fukuoka with Canadian solar modules. There is a work that we have done in Argentina, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Ghana. So I would say it's very simple. It's very easy to work with TCS, and their help, is invaluable. I mean, they're really, really good.
Thank you. And to carbon upcycling technologies, please.
The Trade Commissioner Service has been quite effective in helping us make explore partnerships in different areas. I would say candidly that it has been a hit and miss in many areas. So in some cases, we found the Trade Commissioner Service, I would say in Paris, for example, in France, we found them to be extremely well engaged. And I think that was a function also of how the local market works. It's very centralized, and there are big few and bigger companies there versus the more fragmented market, for example, in Denver or in some other areas in the US. We do believe that, yeah, our experience has been great in some cases and not so great in others, but much of it does boil down to capacity. And I think some specific insights for the commissioners, some specific KPIs that help them look at how startup companies need, what they need to succeed and how they can help achieve that would be very helpful across the board. I think sometimes that's not as obvious because they're dealing with much bigger companies.
Did it affect during the COVID-19 situation, or were you be able to communicate virtually?
Yeah, excellent question. I would say that in one sense, it needed a completely different thinking of the process, because we actually saw that, before, when you had to schedule meetings with groups in Europe or even in the States, they would schedule it 2-3 months in advance because they expected you to come and do it in person. But since COVID, we actually saw a lot of direct communication with those customers or potential buyers. And so it ended up becoming a lot more streamlined. And to be honest, our engagement with the Trade Commissioner's Office since COVID was not very active. We were able to directly go to the customers in most instances.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nuclear power been an interest to me, and particularly, born in a country and raised in a country, where the pollution and nuclear power can play a key role. I know. I was grown up in a town which was powered by water energy. I would like to ask the industry how the nuclear power can play a green recovery role, and particularly not limiting to Canada or North America, but across the globe.
Got to ask Mr. Gorman a brief answer if possible, Mr. Gorman.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Dhaliwal. When I started in the renewables business 20 years ago, we had 36% non-emitting electricity on the world's grids. And today, 20 years later, after a lot of investment and incredible adoption of renewables, we're still at 36% non-emitting electricity. We haven't moved the dial in 20 years. And that's because we continue to partner fossil fuels with these great renewable resources like solar and wind, which are so important. We need to put nuclear in there to partner with wind and solar, and small modular reactors are ideally suited to help do that. So very, very important that we partner nuclear with renewables going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Gorman. Ms. Gray, on for the remaining 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd like to open it up to any of the witnesses that want to put their hand up to answer this. And I know that that many of you had, expressed different barriers that you have in some of your issues. So do you feel in our present trade deals that we have something to offer to help your organization export, or is there something that can be done in future trade negotiations that are missing right now to help with that? So I'll just see if anybody.
Mr. Sina.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, Upwork?
Yes, I would say that, sorry, I can hear myself echoing. One suggestion I would have is to tie some of the free trade elements of an agreement to certain commitments with climate targets. I think there's definitely a lot that can be done for committing that, certain clauses or certain elements of that agreement only come into effect if specific measures are taken in sectors such as, not just in construction, but just overall decarbonization goals.
Great, thank you, Mr. Sinha. Mr. Gorman?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I'd offer this observation. We recently observed something remarkable in that, this has to do with how our financing, our federal government financing is strategizes over who it's going to support. So recently the Romania opportunity opened up to build 2 new nuclear plants and refurbish an existing one. Romania is insisting on can-do technology. The United States, their funding mechanisms like the Exco Bank reached out to industry, identified this as a business opportunity and a strategic opportunity, and engaged industry to go after the opportunity and gave them $8 billion. As you know, the way that our financing system works is very reactive here in Canada, as I'm observing. Industry has to go to government to apply for money to go after these opportunities. It's not both jointly industry and government looking at them together. So we almost lost working in Romania with our own technology because of this sort of reactive stance of the government on financing. And so I hope that we can get more proactive on that.
Great, thank you. Mr. Breton?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have a document that we made called Public Procurement of Electric Vehicles, Recharging Infrastructures and Related Products and Services in Canada, and Analysis under the Rules of International Trade. I think we'll find that very informative and in a way that it could help electric mobility companies working in Canada and the US and get more projects instead of just the lowest bidder.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Pochtarek?
I'm afraid that your time is up. But Mr. Pochtarek, would you like to give a brief answer to that question?
Certainly. The role of Export Development Canada on this is key. Export Development Canada can, and in many cases, provides 2 types of facilities. One is long-term debt, and the other one, which is more simple, is what they call a warehousing facility, which works like a line of credit. So we are using that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the witnesses for opening up this particular study, which will be very informative for all of us. So it is time. Thank you to everyone. I move adjournment of the meeting. Thank you. Oh, by the way, before I have sent out an email, had the clerk send out an email with a bit of an update on our upcoming next 6 or 8 weeks that we have of committee, including Mr. Savard Tremblay's 260. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.